Good afternoon, everyone. Excellencies, Ministers, Minister Zinzri, Vice Minister Yuzuki, Special Advisor, Mr. Masufumi, President of the Federation BTP, Mr. Ksibi, President of JIDA, Mayamoto, Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear colleagues and friends, I'd like first to thank the Tunisian authorities for this kind invitation, and more particularly the Ministry of Equipment and Housing. My name is Khaled Amri. I'm intervening here in my quality of an independent PPP expert and not as part of the African Development Bank. I would like first to present myself and my team, JAD Advisory, a team of 4 persons based out of Tunis, and we serve the African continent and Middle East to do project financing and PPP for public and private sectors. Myself, I am Khaled Amri, civil engineer, specialized in PPP for the past 20 years, advising IFIs, international financial institutions, and development financial institutions in Tunisia, in Africa, and in the Middle East. The purpose of this presentation is to see what are the gaps in terms of financing infrastructure in Africa. How did we do to finance infrastructure in Africa in the past few years? And what is the outlook to fund infrastructure and solutions to fund infrastructure projects in Africa? So the first question is how? How were the African infrastructure financed so far? If we look into the past few years, we see that every year we have almost $85 to $87 billion funded for intact for infrastructure projects in Africa. We see that in the past 5 years, we have between 66 to $85 billion in annually tagged and earmarked for infrastructure in Africa. In terms of breakdown and who provided this funding, of course, the lion's share is from the national governments. As we see, we have 33.4, almost 41% of the amount is provided by governments. The other parts are from the private sector for around 90 billion, which is 38% per year. And the rest is from IFIs, international financial institutions, multilateral development banks, and bilateral agreements for a share of almost 36%. Now, from a sectoral perspective and a regional perspective, the main part of this financing goes to the regions such as West Africa and North Africa. As we see, we have $31 billion that are funded for West Africa in 2020, 15 to 16 billion funded for North Africa, and the other we see as we have a lot of traction as well in East Africa. From a sectoral perspective, the transport sector, highways, public transportation, airports, has a significant share, 33 to 34 billion in 2020. Energy as well, 24 billion to 25 billion in 2020. To a lower extent, we have water and ICT, and I'll come back to that in one slide. Now, the sources of funding, as I've said, government, that's on the top, 33 billion from national governments. We have the private sector, 19 billion, and the remainder of the amount is from multilateral agencies. And we see, of course, the main players here, will it be from a bilateral perspective, but also from the multilateral development banks, such as the African Development Banks, but as well as the EIB, EBRD, and of course, JICA. Next slide. What are the gaps? What are the needs? So we said that around 84 billion are funded every year, whereas what we need is between 137 and 177 billion of infrastructure per year. So to do what? In the transportation sector, we need to have 80% for preservation. We speak a lot of recycling infrastructure, of brownfield infrastructure, but also new developments, new projects are needed. We see 100% need to access water in the urban and rural areas. In the energy sector, the same percentages. In the ICT, and information and communication technology as well, we have a lot of needs to access universal mobile coverage, to have fiber optics, high-speed internet everywhere. So this leads to a lot of needs that are not met so far. And as we see, the water and sanitation sector has the highest financing gap. We speak about gap. We have a funding gap in Africa that should be addressed. Now, if we look into what are the needs as opposed to what was funded, we see that if we take the water sector, we have needs that are in the range of $59 to $60 billion per year, whereas what was committed is $10 billion only. So we have a gap of almost $50 billion per year that is not met and is not funded. Now, PPP, and I'm happy that the Excellencies, the Minister, and as well as the Special Advisor mentioned PPP. PPP could be a solution, but for PPP to be a solution, there are some requirements. Of course, one of them is to have PPP law. And we see a lot of PPP laws. We are involved in most of the African countries, and we see a lot of PPP laws going on, PPP units, including in Tunisia, PPP frameworks with guidelines, with pipelines, and with dedicated sectors that are seen in almost all the African countries that were mentioned. But this is not enough. So what is needed, what is still needed? We have four main pillars that need to be actually addressed for PPPs to be part of the solution, to bridge that gap. The first one is at the institutional level. So we need to have a better attractiveness, a better business climate. We need to reinforce capacities, stronger sectoral commitments. We need not only one PPP unit, but we need more and more sectoral units dedicated, for instance, to water, where we see a big gap. We need as well to have a better project preparation, identification and preparation facilities. Tunisia, for instance, is at the foremost with new PPP development and PPP fund that is being put in place. We need private sector engagement. Let's not forget the private sector as well. We cannot do PPPs only with multilaterals and governments. We need as well to consult the private sector, see what is the appetite for this project from the private sector. Early stage engagement, market testing, a lot of conferences to test the waters and see how the private sector would be able to fund, if there are as well any new ideas. Enable unsolicited proposals with some caveats, of course, a lot of caveats. Enable private financing innovation as well. This is very important. We speak of ICT. We'll come to the sectors that we will see in one slide. We need to launch as well a transparent, fair procurement processes with a clear tendering process. And also, we need to respect the deadlines and respect the timelines, because preparing an offer takes a lot of time and money from the private sector. For the private sector to invest that money, the private sector needs to be sure that at the end of the process, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And this is very important, with a lot of capacity and not only political willingness, but also institutional willingness and people and capacities projected into the ground to make sure these projects arrive to their end and will bear fruit. Now, watch out as well the new trends, because we are in a changing water, as it was said. The projects that will be funded and that will attract funding in a competitive environment. Africa is competing with other regions as well, and African countries are competing to get this funding and this private funding. These projects need to obey to the climate change. They need to obey to a new trend, which is having cyclical economy, sustainability. We speak about resilience. We need to have resilient infrastructure, resilient PPPs. Trend 3, digitalization, and it was mentioned, we need to speak a lot of smart cities, smart infrastructure. What is smart in there? How the technology will help to innovate, enhance the cost, reduce the operation cost, improve the quality of the infrastructure with a better cost, not necessarily a lower cost, but a better cost. We speak about the project life cycle of the project of the PPP that has to be met. A very important trend, trend 4, which is people first PPPs. These projects need to benefit people and benefit the lower incomes. This is very important. It's not only about value for money, it is about value for people. Trend 5, focus on social themes. We have seen water is not met because it's not necessarily a commercial activity. It is a social activity. We see a lot of needs as well for hospitals, education, universities. PPP could help to do that and meet the needs, but it has to be done properly. Finally, the last trend that we see is to have innovating financing. And in innovating financing, we have seen that multilaterals are not sufficient to help and bridge the gap. We will need more private financing, but also probably public finance, citizens financing, and people that could as well have a share in financing the infrastructure. Now, the last slide, we tried to give some examples on upcoming big projects in the PPP arena in Africa. In Tunisia, Gabes wastewater treatment plant as an example. Sfax light rail train is as another examples. These projects need to be funded. Morocco, for instance, we have as well a BRT, bus rapid transit in Marrakesh. Northeast bypass of Greater Agadir. These projects as well, they look for having funding. Senegal as well, Dakar-Bamako corridor. Railway, we have the modernization and revitalization of 1,067 kilometers. Ivory Coast, the management of solid waste. We see a lot of solid waste projects in Dakar as well, in Ivory Coast, in Tunisia. Again, we see some highways. One of them was mentioned. Cameroon, the Yaoundé bypass, and here we don't speak only about a railway or a road. We speak also about new cities and how the urban development could benefit from the new infrastructure. Angola, Trans-Guinea railway line. On the other side, in Egypt, a lot of traction in Egypt with a lot of logistics, project in the logistics such as the 10th of Ramadan City, dry port, new cargo terminal of Savaga. Burundi, here we have other type of needs, social infrastructure in the health sector. Thank you for your attention.